So we're just waiting for Stacy. I want her to project something called the feelings wheel. And this is something we can all use at any time when we're going through something. It can be good or bad. Yes, that's the feelings wheel. Okay, my eyesight is so bad. Stacy, could you help me by just reading like the inside, like the first circle? Yeah, just read through what those feelings are. The yes. Oh, that's better. I think I can see that. So usually we start from here. Like you'll either be happy or you're sad or you're depressed or you're angry or you're feeling fearful or you're surprised. It depends on what's happening in your life at certain times. And one of the most confusing things about emotions is sometimes you can be happy and you're crying, and people might get confused what's happening to you because there's such thing as tears of joy. But it's so important that at any time when we are going through something or we're in the middle of something, that we identify what emotional state we're in. So it's always good to say, I'm excited, I'm feeling let down, I'm disappointed, I'm feeling bitter, because just identifying the emotion helps you to process it yourself and also with the people around you. And I think as we were growing up, personally, as I grew up, I think I want to be honest, it's taken me very many years to study more and understand what emotional support is. And by and large, I think it's because it wasn't a focus for parents. I mean, the parents of our generation were busy, we were working on the farm. So there wasn't really that time for a parent to ask you, how are you feeling? And I remember days that were bad days and I cried myself to sleep. And somehow you knew that when you woke up in the morning, either you'll have forgotten or somehow the emotion will be processed overnight. And one of the other things that I would like to identify also about our culture, or at least in the time that I grew up, when you cried as a child, the first thing you were told is stop crying. And sometimes it's followed with, that is not a thing to cry about. Or the parent would smack you and say, let me give you a reason to cry. And what was happening there is, as the parent maybe has not been able to be in a state of awareness to process their own emotions, and that's probably all they knew. And so it was basically easy to tell the child to straighten their face and stop crying. And there was a focus on basic needs, and you'll hear this even from parents of today. Why are you crying? You have food on your table, clothes on your back, shoes on your feet, you're going to the best schools. Why are you crying? And we forget that even with everything that is deemed necessary, you can still have down moments, because we're human and emotions flow through us, and sometimes we don't have control over that. And the topic today is emotional support for children, but really I want to be clear that as God's children, we all need emotional support. And if we're able to learn how to emotionally support our children, and in the process learn how to also support the adults around us, it actually then helps even the children as they watch you emotionally supporting people. And you'll realize even like in funerals, sometimes people are told, oh, stop crying, just be quiet, it's going to be okay. Crying is a very important part of releasing emotions, especially for a child. So I would like for each of you in your spare time to download this feelings wheel and use it on yourself. For those of you like Amy who even have friends, You could print it and put it somewhere where the kids are able to see it. So when the child is maybe throwing a tantrum, you could ask them, how are you feeling? And they point at what they're feeling. If the child, for example, is feeling fearful, but instead you think they're being disrespectful, then it allows you to help the child to regulate and to process that emotion in that minute. And then you could say, why are you feeling fearful? Then they go ahead and tell you the backstory. Because this feelings wheel is something that is helping you help the child while in the moment, and also for you to take a step back and analyze what's happening to the child at that time. So this feelings wheel is something I use a lot, and especially with the kids I work with when they're having challenges. The first thing I usually ask them, I have two things. On a scale of 1 to 10, how are you doing? And this works very well, especially for my teenagers. And then on, I show them the feelings wheel and say, identify for me how you're feeling. And you'll have a child, maybe like some of the kids I dealt with who are older, who did KCSE last year, and they got maybe a B plus, and they then identify that they're feeling disappointed, and the whole time you're congratulating them and saying you've done so well. But then when they tell you that they're disappointed, you're able to have the conversation with them and say, tell me more about it. So once you have those open-ended questions, then the kids are able to open up and feel safe talking to you. I'd like to just, I think we have enough people. I'd like to basically just define what emotional support is. And just allow me to open. Okay, so the way we're gonna run this is we are going to define what is emotional support, and then we'll take a few minutes for Stacy to play a video for us, something somebody I follow online that I find quite insightful. And then after that, we can delve now into emotional support for children, where we can all have a conversation and see how best do we support our children emotionally. And then we'll conclude with tips on how to support children emotionally. So Stacy, if you're ready, you can play the video, and then what I'd want for all of us is just watch the video, and then you'll relate to it, but a few pointers from it so that we can discuss the video once we are done. So Stacy, whenever you're ready, you can play the video. Karibuni sana Betty, and I think there's 3 others.
Just a moment, Nora. Give me about 3 minutes so that I
No
can
problem.
retrieve it.
No problem. Maybe just off of the feelings wheel, can we take a minute, and in the chat, I'd like for each of us to identify how you're feeling. So if you can just go to your phone and Google the feelings wheel, and then write in the chat how you're feeling. Just one word, and let's explore that. So I'm just trying to access the chat. So I'm accessing the chat. Don't think too much about what you're feeling, and Thank you. Okay. Just give me that. Okay, and call messages. Okay, Eunice, I'm not able to access any of the messages. So I'm here waiting. If each of you has gone online, or you don't even have to go online, you can actually just put how you're feeling. Stacy, you're ready? Thank you, Amy.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Let's keep putting that as Stacy is getting ready to play the video. Pal, I think Pal had connection issues and she had left. There's no judgment. So it's a feelings wheel. So let me just put in the happy. I like that. It's called the feelings wheel. I'm just gonna type what it's called in the group. Yes, the feelings wheel. There are quite a few, and there's some that are simpler than others. Okay. Thanks, John, for sharing the link. So if you just click on the message from John, and that shows you the feelings wheel, and then you can select from there how you're feeling. Like I said, there's no judgment. Basically, we're just trying to get the mood in the room. Okay, as we do that, we'll come back to this. I think Stacy, you seem to be ready. You could play the video. I think the sound is having an issue. Can we hear? Stacy, would it be easier if we just share it in the group? Because we're not able to hear what he's saying. I'm not sure if it's...
Uh-huh. You can't hear the
No,
sound.
it's muzzled.
Okay.
You want to try again or share it in the group?
Yeah. Maybe let me just share it in the
Okay.
group.
Karibu sana, Rose.
Thank you.
I've shared it in the group. I'm also going to post the link on the chat.
Okay. Karibu sana. Purity. Karibu sana. We're just exploring the feelings wheel, and Stacy is going to share the video because we're having sound issues, and each of us can just click on it. So Stacy, you're gonna share in the in-call messages. Thank you, Pal. Okay, can everybody access the chat, which is called the in-call messages? And both the feelings will, but I'd like us to now focus on the reel that she just posted. Please type yes if you've been able to see it. Type yes in the chat. Thank you. Thank you, John. Pal, Purity, Eunice, are you able to access the link? Betty, are you able to access the link? Just check in the in-call messages. When you go to your menu and press on the in-call messages. Okay. Good. Okay. So Pal can access it. Amy, you can access it. I think I'm waiting for Amy. Betty is able to open it. Is it because it's on Facebook? I think it's a Facebook reel, Stacy.
Yes,
Because
it
the other
is.
thing you can do is try to play it again. I'm not sure where the sound. Kevo, could you try something? Okay. The fact that this video is not playing is changing my feelings wheel. I think earlier I had said I was excited, and sometimes when we are going through something that is king, then it tends to shape the direction that your emotions take. Basically, just as I know you're going to be watching the video, I think what the video does is basically a 1-2 year old child who's throwing a tantrum or hitting and hitting the mother and biting, and then the mother tells the child to go to the corner because they are not being nice. And the guy in the video explains about the three emotional states, or rather developmental stages in terms of how our brain develops. So the first stage that all of us are usually in is survival mode, and that's where the younger children will be, where if a child is, for example, they're teething or they want something, they hit you to get it, and they don't really process things as the way adults process it. And I also want to note that these stages sometimes, some of us, you oscillate between using your survival, using the three stages. I think the survival, the emotional, and the executive state. In the survival, you're just trying to survive. So this is where you blame, and you basically, it's where you freeze, or some people go into flight. And in the emotional state now, you tend to see the world as you versus them, and you don't see the problem. So that is the emotional state. And then the highest state is the executive state, which we all desire to be in, where you're open to learning skills, you're open to being empathetic about a situation, you can regulate your emotions. And these three states, basically, as adults, then we expect to operate more in the executive state than in the survival state. Because what happens if you and the child are both in the survival state, it means they're kicking, and sometimes you're kicking them back. They're screaming, you're screaming back. So both of you are trying to basically win, and you're not making progress. You start making progress when you're able to step out and see that the child is in survival mode, and they're just trying to defend themselves. and then you now start looking at the problem and not the child. And like in this case, you're able to see the child as not giving you a hard time, but really having a hard time. I'd like to spend a little bit of time on that. There's a difference between what a child is doing to give you a hard time and when a child is going through a hard time. And a few examples from the young ones when they throw themselves on the floor, they want something, they're having a hard time because they want that piece of candy that they've seen in the supermarket. If you go to like teenagers when they've gone to school and maybe their grades are not so good and they're not communicating and they go totally quiet, they're not quiet to give you a hard time, but they're having a hard time with what's going on in their life. And what we are trying to learn even by having this conversation is how then as parents and guardians can we operate in the executive state where we can teach our children skills, and this is what we're going to be talking about later, where we teach them skills on how to navigate their feelings and sufficiently support them emotionally. One of the things I've always identified in this parenting journey, in these conversations of EmpowerWiz, is we all tend to parent from how we were parented. So if you made a mistake, and back then it was you broke a glass or you dropped a plate or you tripped and fell, usually the focus was not on you falling, it was on the glass that you broke, then you were beaten or you were shouted at. So what happens when we become adults, if we don't take time to have these conversations and create awareness, self-awareness, and also with the people around us, then we end up doing the same things to our children in terms of how we support our kids. And an example even from the video is when a child is teething and they're having their gums are giving them trouble, they tend to want to bite on anything. And for the younger ones, they'll just come, maybe even it's a visitor, they grab their hand, and usually when they bite on like your hand, it feels good on their gums. So if you are able to identify that, instead of shouting at the child and shaming them for doing something wrong, you can try and identify that, okay, the child is drooling and what they really need is a teething ring. There are these fancy things that, you can put in the fridge or freezer and it's cold and you give the child to bite on it. So that at any one time, whatever the child is going through, and it doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it helps us to always take a step back and be, in lack of a better word, the parent in the situation and operate from an executive state. So this information is online, and I think for me, I have taken a lot of time to try and understand what emotional support is. I went to boarding when I was 8 or 9 years old. And for those of you who know, when you go to boarding school, you're really on your own. So I feel like I didn't really learn a lot of what emotional support looked like. So it's been really a journey for me to learn how to support my children emotionally by saying things like, how are you feeling about it? Tell me more. What happened at school? How did that make you feel? What are some of the things that are coming to mind when you think about that? Those open-ended questions that help a child, even in that moment, also explore that emotion that they're going through. So before I forget, for those who joined a bit late, there is something called the feelings wheel that I would encourage, especially those with young children, to print it and always use it as a guide when you are exploring and helping your child navigate their feelings. I want to pause there and give, if anyone has something to say around what maybe they deem emotional support to be or what it's not. And just because this is a conversation, and I'd like to hear from you as other parents or guardians so that we can also share ideas as we try to raise empowered kids. So I want to pause there, and Stacey, you can help me for hands that are raised for anyone who would like to comment or ask questions. If you can't find where to raise your hand, just unmute and speak.
You can also share your questions on the chat box. You can also share your questions on the chat box. I can just read them out if you feel like that will be ideal for you.
This is a safe space. There is no judgment, and we're all learning and growing together. And learning is really it's a life process. I don't think we ever get to a place where we know everything. I know sometimes we have positioned ourselves as parents as maybe knowing everything, but truth be told, we're all learning, and sometimes it's okay to be vulnerable, to learn with your child. And like when you're processing emotions together as a family, if a tragedy happens in the family, it's okay to talk about your emotions in a group setting where each of you is able to talk about how they feel. It can be a pet has died. It can be a death in the family, of a grandmother, a parent, a sibling. It's very important that children are included in these conversations, and that as parents we guide them to find the right words to navigate their emotions, like how they're feeling, and then just help them with skills on how to get out of that situation, as practical as we can be. I think in the African culture we tend to, let me say, ignore the kids and sort of think they're too young to have feelings. But at a very young age, actually, even from a newborn baby can pick the emotion that the mother is going through. And I'm not an expert in this. I actually, a lot of my learning has been through raising my kids who are now teenagers. So I welcome any of your ideas, suggestions, comments, so that we can just have this conversation together. So Stacy, you will stop me when you see something in the chat. Any questions, comments? I'm aware we could have kids at different ages, and what I always tell the parents of younger children is it does get better, and it just things change. The emotions that you handle when a child is 2, 3, 4, 5 get a bit more complicated when the child gets older. And it's really, really important to build those connections and the bonds and the safe spaces for the child at a young age, so that as they get older, you're able to have this conversation with them and they can open up to you. Because up until the age of, maybe, let me say, for most kids until 8, 9, 10, kids can be very descriptive and very open. But as they start heading towards the teenage years, 11, 12, 13, then the kids, you'll see them now start to stay in their rooms. If you ask them, how are you doing? It's, I'm okay, I'm cool, I'm good. They just do a thumbs up. And it's very confusing for parents, because some parents will even take that and say, I don't know what's wrong with my child. They don't talk to me anymore. And that is the time when you take a step back and try to wonder what could be going on in this child's life. You have children who are being bullied, they don't talk about it. And every opportunity that maybe you have to explore that emotion with the child gets lost in how you process them when you see them quiet. Thank you, Pearl. I think I'm able to see your post. Okay, so let me just read it. As a parent who has 4 childhood traumas and one, trying to be a best friend to my children, I believe emotional support is very important to every child, not just your own. And that is so true. I think sometimes, and one of the reasons I'm so passionate about working with kids, you will see a lot of kids misunderstood and probably treated in a way that is not fair to them. Probably you've been in those supermarket situations where the child wants a piece of candy and the parent just, beats up that child, like right there in front of everybody, and says, "You will not behave like this." And I find myself in so many situations trying to save the child. Of course, there will be, the, spare the rod, spoil the child, theory, which I personally don't subscribe to. I'm very big on conversation and consequence management. And I think when a child has done something wrong, the first thing they need is support, because a lot of times you'll find even the child themselves is embarrassed and they don't feel happy about what they've done. So apart from maybe disappointing you as a parent, they're also going through a difficult time. And every time when a child is having a difficult moment, we should always take it back and say, if it was me, because we also have this moment, what would I want in this moment? Probably you'd want somebody to give you a hug and someone to say, would you like to take a few hours? Would you like to sleep over it and we can talk about it? Or I'm here to talk if you'd like to talk about it. So thank you, Pal, for identifying the fact that when you've gone through trauma as a child and you're in this healing journey, it's so important to be there for your kids, not how your parents were there for you, but through the new skills that you have learned. So I believe so much in being gentle with children and always taking a step back and knowing that as a parent, you're the safest place for your child. And so different children will have different behaviors. And one of the sad stories that I always tell is some parents actually realize their children are autistic maybe at the age of 5 or 6, and the whole time I had a close relative of ours who discovered their child was hard of hearing, and they had been beating this child and saying that this child, whenever I call them, they don't answer and they don't respond quickly. So you find this child also did not understand what was going on with them, but they were hard of hearing. And so eventually they did get that child hearing aids, and sadly it's hard to repair some of the damage, but through counseling and the right support and the parents being vulnerable around what they think they could have done better with the child, and even apologizing to your child, is very important. Let me just check the chat. Yes, go ahead, Stacy.
Carl asked a question. Carl is asking, how can we help parents who still have childhood traumas and keep projecting them to their children?
And wow, that is so hard, because usually it's in the parents' blind view. They don't even realize that what they're doing is projecting to their children. If it was me and I'm an adult in that person's life, I would recommend counseling if possible, because I think a lot of people tend to think that counseling is it's like treatment for a problem. Sometimes counseling is actually being able to understand what your past looked like and what are some of the luggage that you're carrying, and then this is what then you're projecting. So I would say if it was somebody in my circle, I would try to have a conversation with them, and refer them to counseling, because counseling is so underrated. Like it's underrated, and I think misunderstood, if you ask me, because without counseling, some of us have not even been able to process what certain things that happened in our childhood. And even if we've been able to process them, we've not been able to start healing. And healing will not start until you actually take that step to go through counseling. So I think, unfortunately, a lot of children are suffering because traumas are being projected onto them, and because the parents cannot admit it, and the child also does not understand it. Yeah. The other thing I realized that it's really powerful, and again, this is something that we can achieve as the adults in each other's lives, is just sometimes sharing your story. Have you ever noticed when you share your story around your childhood and somebody else gets shocked? Like when you tell somebody, so my mom used to come home and she would beat us up. Like she had this special cane and she would beat us up, and then we would all cry ourselves to sleep. And that was just normal. She was disciplining us. And then just as you're sitting there telling somebody that story, they have this look on their face and they're shocked and they're like, that wasn't right. And you're like, wait, did it not happen for you? And they tell you, no, we used to do Bible study and pray, and we would get hugs and kisses, and then we would go to sleep, and there was always a Bible story. And you're thinking, wait a minute, that sounds like the things I see in the movies. I didn't know it happens. And that's when you start identifying that what you're actually dealing with is a lot of trauma from your childhood that you normalized as a child. Yeah, so I would say if you're not able to, push that person or encourage them to go for counseling, then you can just have them at least open up to you and share their stories. And these are usually open-ended questions like, tell me more about where you grew up, or how was it, what were some of the best moments for you when you were a child, or what are some of the memorable Christmases that you had when you were young, or what was your Christmas tradition, or what was a typical day for you, back in the village. I grew up in the village. And you're able to share with someone, and then you start identifying some of the things that now you're able to look at and see that they were not right. Yeah, Pal, I hope that answers your question. And thank you so much for really raising that, because I think a lot of us are dealing with a lot of child trauma that remains unresolved, and we end up projecting this to our kids. And I think it's so important for each of us to try and protect the children in our lives. It can be a neighbor's child, it can be a niece, it can be any children in your lives. It's always important if we can identify and try and support both the child and the parent through these emotional issues. Stacy?
Pali is asking. Pali is asking. Could you give us ways in which we can approach children who are withdrawn? For example, you meet or see a child who is not okay, and
Okay.
is
So maybe, and this could be for different. Go ahead, Stacy.
scared to speak up.
Stacy, could you just repeat? So I don't know if I cut you off.
I'm saying, Pali is asking a question. Could you give us ways in which we can approach children who are withdrawn? For example, you meet or see a child who is not okay and is scared
Okay.
to speak up.
Okay. Again, depending on the scenario, because it could be a party, it could be on the street, it could be a child of someone you know. I think what I've noticed always works for children is like, meeting them at their level. So, when you stand up and the child is very little and they're looking up at you, that's usually intimidating. So the first thing you do is probably, if the child is on the floor, you could sit on the floor and just start simple, hi. And if they don't say hi back, you could put out your hand and try and see if they'll greet you back. And if the parent is around, you could also ask them, what does the child like? It could be a toy or a game. Children they have reflex actions when you start playing a game. So if you have an activity or something that the child can be involved in, it's very easy to get a child to talk. And the focus should be to get the child to talk, as opposed to tell you what their problem is. Because once you have the child interacting and talking, and they've kind of identified that you're a safe person and they can open up to you, then they'll be able to tell you what their problem is. Because if you start off with, what's bothering you, or what's your name, are you okay, then you might not get much out of that child. So maybe you could say things like, hi, what's your name? I like your shirt. Can we play a game of hide and seek? Would you like to try some of these cupcakes? Have you had something to eat? Very simple talk. And by the way, this works for both children and adults. But when you go, hard at someone and say, "Why are you looking upset? Do you want to share what the problem is?" Immediately, the reaction of that person is they cringe, because what you just created is an unsafe space. Even being able to just be quiet and sit with that person. If it's a child and they're sitting, maybe it's a party, they're not talking to other people, just sit near the child. There's actually an energy exchange that will happen. And after a certain, amount of time, the child will probably look to their right and see, okay, this person has been sitting here. And, at that time, when they're ready to talk, they might, even your body language could show them that you're a safe person. I've also noticed that with teenagers, if they're willing to talk, it is so important for you to at least promise them and keep the conversations confidential. One of the things that will get a child not talking is if they share something with you and then you share it in a way that makes them feel embarrassed or humiliated. So it's very important that when you engage a child, as much as possible, to keep it, a one-on-one conversation, as opposed to, having them talk about what they're going through, unless it's sort of like group therapy. So that one-on-one creates more safety, and, it helps the child to feel safe. So children who are withdrawn can be, many reasons. It could be the child has gone through a traumatic experience. It could be the child is an introvert. And this might be a child who opens up when they're doing artwork. And so you try to find what is it that gets this child talking. It could be a child who's going to talk at a football game. So try to identify what the likes of that child are, and then engage them in that activity. Pal, I really want to thank you for raising such important issues. And because I know even for those of us that it doesn't directly affect, when we talk about these things, then when you're faced with it, you're able to deal differently than before. So thank you, Pal. Any other comments or questions?
Yes, another one from Pal. She's asking, on the same case, would you advise one to approach a parent or a guardian of the child after
Yes.
finding out the problem?
Yes,
Would you
but I
advise?
think with a bit of
Okay.
caution, because usually if you are an unhealed parent who's projecting on a child, if the channel that is used feels like you're being attacked, then your reception might not be good. So I think it's so important to maybe find someone who's close to that person and find a really soft way to approach it. And like I said, use the same strategy as you would use on the child. Get small talk going, and then say, do you think we can talk about your daughter? I noticed she wasn't talking to anybody in the party, and I found her crying in the bathroom. Do you think we can talk about it? And I think depending on the approach, there are two things that will happen. Either the parent gets really offended, but you need to be proud of yourself that you've raised the issue with that parent. Or the parent is actually receptive and you're able to help them then work through the issues that that child is going through. Or even I've had my friends allow me to work with their children and basically give their children comfort around. You can go and speak to Auntie Nora, and it will be confidential. I'm sure if it's something that we need to work on, she can always come back to me. So if you're able to then find a structure that works for the adult and the child, it would be very helpful. But I really feel that as a community, if you see a child going through something, please try and help the child in one way or another. Children are going through abusive, and really sad environments. And sometimes you hear of the horrendous acts that are happening to children, and adults were around that child, and people will say things like, "Sini mtoto wake," but the child is helpless and their rights are being violated. So if we can, let's all try to speak up. I notice we are well spent on time, so I just wanted to go what some of the material I had prepared, and I'll just read through. The most important needs for a child are unconditional love from a family, and usually a child, especially from a very young age, just wants to play with other children and people around them who make them feel safe and secure. And if you can have a child and nurture self-confidence and high self-esteem, then that child ends up growing as a very well emotionally supported child. So love, security, and acceptance are very high in terms of the needs chart for a child, right from the time when they are born, And then accepting children's mistakes allows them to also become confident and feel and know that they are loved unconditionally. Some of the examples is you just sometimes need to give the child space to talk and to listen to them and offer reassurance. And sometimes what we need to recognize is that seeking help, and this is both for adults and children, can be a very lonely and sometimes scary process. So if a child tells you that they're in a fearful space, please be calm, be patient, don't make assumptions, and try as much as possible to help the child. I want to share some tips on how to provide emotional support for children. I know the topic is wide and we cannot exhaust it, but some of the ones I'm just going to share is responding to a children's reaction in a supportive way rather than in an attacking way. Again, going back to if the child is in survival mode, please try and operate from your executive state. And simple things like not raising your voice when a child is going through a difficult time can be very helpful in helping a child to regulate their emotions. Explain to the child that how they feel is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. Listen to the child's concerns and take time to comfort them and give them affection. There's nothing wrong with a 2-minute hug or a 5-minute hug for a child who's struggling. And that works for adults too. Reassure them, tell them that they're safe, ask them to name their emotions. So always have that feelings wheel and help the child to name their emotion, how they are feeling. And that usually then guides you in terms of how to support them. Positive reinforcement, and this is by praising the child frequently in their good moments and not only reprimanding them when they do something wrong, so that the child feels supported all round. And then if possible, create opportunities for children to relax and to play, because this helps them feel that they're in a safe environment. Then keep regular routines and schedules as much as possible, especially before they go to sleep, and help create new ones in a new environment. There is a video I watched online that was so heartbreaking, and this guy says, he talks about your voice not being the inner critic. Your voice should be a voice that affirms your child. And if for those of you who grew up in my era, when you're doing something wrong, sometimes you could hear mom's voice. But sometimes when you're going through a difficult time, you should equally be able to hear your mom or your dad's reassuring voice telling you it's going to be okay. So let us try to not be the critics, but the supporters for our children. And then just as I finish, provide age-appropriate facts about what is happening, explain what is going on, and empower the child with skills that can support them in navigating their emotions. And give clear examples of how they can handle difficult situations. When, a teenager comes and tells you there's a girl or there's a boy in school who's been bullying me, it wouldn't be right to tell the child to ignore it. Yeah, explore what the child's experiences are, and maybe even see how to engage another adult at school to help the child in that journey, instead of telling the child, why don't you just ignore it and concentrate on your studies. And then just in conclusion, we cannot control our children's feelings, but we can teach them how to navigate them by how we navigate our own feelings. Emotions are contagious, and people and children unconsciously mimic the emotional expressions of those around them. And you've seen, like, if a mother is crying, usually the baby also starts crying. So and if you're usually not in good space and you're trying to comfort a crying baby, it's very hard to make progress. So emotions are contagious, and by acknowledging our children's emotions, we are helping them learn skills for soothing themselves, skills that will serve them well for a lifetime. So if you want to support your children emotionally, you need to take care of your own emotional health. Your tone, your energy, and your overall emotional presence serve as your child's emotional guidepost. I'd like to end there, and we could spend about 5 minutes. If there are any questions, you can either post in the group or raise your hand. I think emotional health and emotional support is a topic that we don't spend enough time on. And it's actually part of the reason why sometimes we end up with mental health issues. Like, people get depressed because they're not being supported emotionally, and eventually they sink into depression. Stacy, please check if there are any comments or questions in the group. Go ahead.
Yes,
We have other question. Amy is asking,
we have other question.
process
Amy is
feelings
asking,
of
how do you
disappointment
help
and anger.
kids process feelings of disappointment and anger?
Okay, and a good question is, how would I process the same feelings of disappointment and anger? And so the first thing that you need to do is, you ask the child and they say, I'm disappointed, and maybe it's a grade that they were trying to achieve. So the first thing you need to do is let them know it's okay to feel how they're feeling. Let them know that if it was me, I would also feel disappointed. Yeah. Number 2, ask the child for any of the details and try and make them feel better that, okay, if it's, let's say, an exam that they were preparing for or a sport that they were preparing for, try and put a bit of focus in the process, in terms of, I remember how you woke up every day, and I'm really proud of you for the effort that you put in towards this. Yeah. So find the positive things that happened up until the point at where the child is disappointed. And then the third thing is to try and now navigate things around, if it's possible for the child to try again. But really, it's important that at that time, you could even stop the conversation and say, can I give you a hug? Because I know this is really hard for you. And this, I promise you, works for a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, all the way to someone who's 100 years old. Yeah. Just validating someone's feelings is so important. Yeah. If you know, like, it's maybe a 5-year-old and they were in school and they had a competition and they come home and they're crying a river and they're saying, I was supposed to win, I did everything I could. The first thing you want to do is give them a hug and say, I'm so sorry that happened. That's so important in terms of helping them navigate the feeling, because the first thing the child wants to acknowledge is you connect with how they're feeling. But if you dismiss it, then right there you have created an unsafe environment and they're not able to even come and tell you next time. So then you can explore now if there's a chance to try. If there's not a chance to try, then you can reinforce positively on the things that they did right leading up to the failure, and tell them, you know, your hard work, your resilience, your consistency, and everything that you did was very important, even if you did not achieve the result that you wanted. Then from there on, you can now develop an accountability matrix If it's a child who has failed exams, try and help them through maybe rereading for the exams and just helping them walk through that journey of feeling disappointed. Yeah. Stacy, back to you.
Yes, Purity has a question.
Yes, Purity has a question. In the event that a mother is always using harsh tones, a harsh tone and words to the child who is like 2 years old, what could be
Okay.
the long-term implications
Yeah.
to the
So the
child?
long-term implications, and I said this space is there's no judgment here. I remember when my kids were maybe 1 or 2 years old, and they make messes. They don't eat, and I remember being very strict with my kids. Now they are 16 and 19, and I spend a lot of time apologizing for being that mom, and they actually identify and say, you're a bit more flexible as we grew up. Yeah. There is no easy way or one size fits all in terms of how a parent handles a situation with their kids, and words are the most expressive, and sometimes you'll find as a parent those are the words that were used on you, so you're using those words. But what will happen in the long term, to Purity's point, is the child will probably know not to come to you when something goes wrong. You will actually have defined what we call an unsafe space for that child, and they will know to maybe lie, disguise, or die with their problem instead of coming to you. So if that's a 2-year-old, when they are going to be 12, and this could be as simple as they started their period at school and it was an embarrassing moment, they might not actually feel safe to come and tell you because they feel you might say something harsh like you should have been more prepared. Yeah. So what you create is an unsafe environment that may not be apparent when the child is 2, 3, or 4, but as they go into the teen years, then it becomes very clear that you're not the go-to person for this child. And the child might also start striving for some level of perfection that is probably acted and not real. And they start to lose their authenticity in how they do things probably around you. And if you investigate, you might find that child in a space where they're more comfortable, they are probably more relaxed, and they're allowed to make mistakes and they can talk about them. So that safety is something that we need to start nurturing when the child is young. And words once spoken cannot be taken back. Some of us actually remember some of the words that we were told when we were very young. Yeah. It could be a label that was put on you. It could be something that you did that was purely innocent, but your parent or guardian shouted at you. So words are very powerful. And unfortunately, you'll not realize the impact until the child is much older. Purity, I hope that answers your question. Stacy, are there any other? Okay. It is
No other question at the
7:43.
moment.
I am aware that for some of these conversations, sometimes we come to just learn together. And I'd like to also say that my passion is working with kids, and I hope that one day I can be an expert. But currently, I speak from a place of just being a parent myself and hoping to teach other parents who are younger or who have younger children the things that I probably would have wanted to be taught or to know or talk about when my kids were younger. So Empower Wiz is a safe space where parents can talk, where our goal is to give every child a voice. I'd like to encourage each of you to follow us on our socials. We're on Instagram as Empower Wiz. We are on Twitter. We are on Facebook. And we are on, what's the other social media? TikTok. Yeah. So we have content that mostly we notice that our audience is parents. So our content is usually geared towards raising empowered children by empowering parents with information and allowing ourselves to have these conversations. We have this particular webinar every last Thursday of the month. If you follow us on our socials, we cover the topic during the month. and then it culminates into the webinar at the end of the month. So feel free to reach out to EmpowerWiz on Instagram, or I will also, Stacy, you can share my number in the chat for anyone who would want to personally chat me. We also have a community where I'd also like to encourage each of you. Stacy, I think you can post, I don't know if you can post a link, I'm not sure how it's done, but you can share the links to the Instagram pages and the WhatsApp community. I have to admit that I mostly use WhatsApp, so Stacy takes care of our other platforms, and I'd like to encourage each and every one of you to follow us, comment, engage, and then at particular times we also organize live sessions for the children, and we're here to support you in the parenting journey and learn together. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking your almost an hour and a half of your time, which I know could have gone into other things. So we really, really appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you.